I genuinely believe these are the most important podcast episodes you will ever listen to. This is part 3 of a 14-part series on our investigation for the truth and finding universal principles for a good human life. The mission is enlightenment. In the first episode, we looked at what enlightenment is. In the second episode, which was technically the 7th because it was the previous one, we looked at how you achieve enlightenment, as well as generally productivity and consciousness, which are two cornerstones of enlightenment and living a good human life and seeking truth and everything that is good and pure. And today we are talking about learning, which is perhaps the most important thing out of all of them. It's one of the core pillars alongside productivity, alongside consciousness, alongside enlightenment in a way. So follow the podcast so you don't miss all the future episodes on becoming the next evolution of man, and let's get started. The first thing you need to know is that curiosity, the thing we have as kids, is the engine for growth. It's the thing that allows us to move forward, because curiosity leads to learning. Naturally, when you're curious about something, you want to learn about it, you learn about it, you consume information that then allows you to change behavior. It's something that is naturally present in childhood. I mean, that's why kids ask so many questions, partially because they know so little, but mostly because that's just how we're born. We want to seek truth. We want to learn about the world we inhabit. However, it's often lost through life. It's stamped out of you. A kid who asks too many questions annoys his parents, gets their scorn, and learns to not ask any questions. Just do as he's told. And then you have school, which obviously doesn't help, where you can ask questions, kind of. I mean, when you get older, you can, because at least in more informal schools, it's more of like a dialogue with the teacher. But when you're younger, not really. And even that, you can ask some questions, but they need to be within a very narrow spectrum of things you can ask. Everything outside of it is off limits. You piss off the teacher for asking such stupid, irrelevant questions. So we must consciously reclaim it and protect it. We want to keep our childlike wonder alive. You must deliberately allow yourself to be curious again. Curiosity is the desire to expose yourself to new information, which then means you basically are okay with changing your mind. You're not rigid in your beliefs. And curiosity fuels learning, which leads to productivity, which leads to enlightenment. One thing we looked at in the previous episode, or the previous conversation we had, was that productivity, which is doing the work or the actions required to get you to your goal, requires you to have information. Because if your goal is to be in good shape, firstly, you need to be able to differentiate between being in good shape and being in bad shape, information, plus why it is good to be in good shape and why it is bad to be in bad shape from the human perspective. Obviously, you can say good and bad are just human constructs. They are, but from the human perspective, they're not entirely. They still are, but they do exist. Good and evil do exist from the human perspective. And so naturally, the desire to acquire new information, which is what we currently define as learning, but we will change that in a bit, leads to new information, which allows you to be more productive because you know better than to eat bad food or to waste your time, which then leads to enlightenment, or rather the revolt part of enlightenment. Enlightenment is the realizations we looked at in episode 6, in our 6th conversation, you could say. But from there, you need to revolt against the absurd, which you do through self-improvement, which is also called enlightenment. However, before we continue our conversation, we need to understand that learning is not memorizing information. Rather, learning is changing behavior. I'm going to repeat that. Learning is not memorizing information as you're told in school and literally everywhere. Learning is changing behavior. You don't learn if you don't change what you're doing about life and how you approach it. It's good to memorize a bunch of information, but if that doesn't lead to any concrete change, any concrete improvement in your life, you didn't learn anything. Behavior change only happens when you're exposed to new information. And the way you want to look at this is a bit like a fuel tank in a car. Every time you consume new information, you need to make sure it's good information, which is what we'll talk about later. But so you're putting fuel, not water, not trash, not sewage water, into your fuel tank, right? You're putting it in. you never want to just keep pouring fuel because eventually it's going to overflow and you're not using the fuel anyway, right? You can consume all the information you want, but if you're not doing anything with it anyway, you might as well just keep it empty. The epitome of this is the people who watch thousands of videos and tutorials and read books about starting a business, for example. They know everything there is about business history, about business tactics, strategies, economics, everything, but they never actually start a business. That's the equivalent of pouring gas in your tank, but never actually driving the car. So on the one hand, you have consuming new information, which is filling up your gas tank, making sure it's good fuel, which we'll talk about later. But then secondly, you want to drive your car, because that's the only reason you put fuel in a car is to use it to get somewhere. So you want to eventually stop pouring the fuel in and actually drive your car. Now the balance with this, and so driving your car in this metaphor means changing your behavior, going towards your goals, being productive, using the fuel you have, the information you've put in your gas tank, in your mental storage tank, for change, for progress towards your goals, which we call productivity. And in terms of balancing these two, you don't want to have your gas tank overflow because that's dangerous. It might blow up. I'm talking in real life, but also in this metaphor. You don't want to have too much fuel because then it also weighs you down, right? That's like the beginner who learns about the most advanced thing in karate or kung fu, and then he's afraid to even step into the ring or the boxing ring or whatever because he knows all these things and he's scared of everything. When what he should have done is put a bit of fuel in. That way he can actually rev the car, he can move forward a bit and not put so much that it weighs him down. At the same time, you want to have enough fuel to keep going at the highest pace possible. If you only fill up your gas tank a tiny bit, you can speed up, you can go maybe a few kilometers, a few miles, but you'll never be able to reach the highest speed. And if you do, it will only be for a very short period of time because you're going to run out of fuel. So you want to keep this balance where you basically want your storage tank to be full and slightly more than what you're consuming. You always want to have a slight surplus so you never have less than enough information to act. Keeping in mind you will never have enough information to act. That's a separate thing. But you always want to have a slight surplus of fuel in your car when driving. Again, you take the metaphor, apply it to learning. Learning provides fuel for productivity. Productivity is defined as making progress towards your goals, not busyness, not always working frantically like a little ant. Productivity frequently requires new learning, so acquiring new information, changing your behavior with some goal of getting you towards somewhere. And so learning is therefore a cornerstone of enlightenment and seeking truth and everything that is good and pure, which I've already mentioned earlier. We are often motivated to learn in order to fix problems. You would very rarely want to pick up a plumber, like a plumber's manual, unless you have a clogged sink, right? So we are motivated to learn in order to fix our problems. And generally, well, you don't even want to see them as problems, but rather opportunities or challenges. That's a whole separate topic. But fixing your problems leads to a better life. If you don't have enough money, that's a problem. Fixing that problem makes your life better and allows you to solve other problems, maybe your relationships, maybe your health. But so you need to realize that not all inputs are the same. If you have a clogged sink, and I presented you two things, either a plumber's manual, a plumbing 101 for beginners, and I gave you a Peppa Pig book, which one would you choose? Obviously, you choose the plumbing one. But why is that? Because by choosing one over the other, you admit, in a way, not that it's a big revelation, that some content, some fuel is better than others, right? If you have a car, you don't want to put water in it, you don't want to put fruit juice in it, you don't want to put hot chocolate, you want to put ethanol or fuel or diesel or whatever you use. You generally want to stick by the saying that you are what you consume. And obviously that's, well, not obviously, but you can notice it on a physical level where the food you consume physically, you kind of tend to look like. I don't know if you've noticed, but people who eat softer foods that are easier to chew usually look softer, whereas people who eat like harder, unprocessed foods in a weird way look unprocessed or like harder, more defined, a bit like how owners of their dogs look like their dogs. But anyways, you are what you consume, so you must ruthlessly choose gold, the equivalent of gold, over sewage water. You want to protect your mind the same way you would protect something precious, the same way you would protect your body. just like you wouldn't eat poison, you also shouldn't feed your mind poison. You are what you consume. You want to screen all the inputs you consume. That means all the media, all the books, but also all the people. And you don't want to allow any junk, obviously, unless you would purposely ingest poison, which I don't think you would. Same way you wouldn't purposely surround yourself with negative inputs, poisonous inputs. Don't feed your mind garbage or petrochemicals, right? So now I'm going to go over the different kinds of inputs, give you a rough breakdown. Obviously, there's exceptions. Obviously, it's not one size fits all, but generally speaking, you'd be best off avoiding short form content. Actually, a way to think about it is the length of the content is usually proportional to the quality up to a certain point. And then even then, it's not entirely the same. So basically everything that's less than 30 minutes is very rarely life-changing or very good content. Even YouTube, actionable step. You look through your YouTube watch history, I bet you regret in some way, shape, or form, regret watching 70, 80, 90% of the videos you've watched on YouTube, if not 97, 99% of them. YouTube is not incentivized to change your life. The creators are not incentivized to change your life, but rather keep you watching, which very rarely means giving you the truth or life-changing content, but rather just entertaining you. So that's one thing, right? The sort of medium length. You also have short-form content, which definitely does not help. I mean, you know it for yourself. And if you're still consuming short-form content, that's just a shame. But then you have, well, YouTube is a controversial one. I think where it starts getting good is podcasts, because podcasts allow you to get a deeper perspective, and often, yes, they obviously gain from you continuing to listen, but it's a longer lifespan format where as long as you get value out of a podcast, even if it's not the best made or the most clickbaity, you'll keep coming back to it. You have podcasts, books, 100%. Courses are a hit or miss, but generally they're okay. And even some movies, right? And what you'll notice with these four types of content, you have books, you have movies, you have, what else did I say? Podcasts, and you have courses. All of those have a few things in common. One, they're longer than 30 minutes, longer than 1 hour most of the time. And secondly, they take a very long time to make. And I think that's the biggest indicator. Something else you could look at is what is the average intelligence of the people consuming that content. The average intelligence of someone consuming short form is probably around average, maybe a bit lower because it's young people or it's just stupid people. The average IQ of people reading books is way above average because most people don't. And generally, intelligent people read books. So that's another way to look at it. So you have the length of the content, you have the IQ, the average IQ of the person consuming it, but also you have how long it takes you to make. A short form video takes maybe half an hour at most, maybe 1 hour, like being very generous, 1 hour to make. But you could film, I think most short form content is filmed within 10 minutes, right? A YouTube video might take someone a week to make. If we look at these four, a course takes at least a month, if not a few months to make. A book takes years. A movie also takes years. And podcasts it really depends on the podcast, but usually they take longer than a YouTube video. That's why a lot of podcasts aren't posted more than once per week. A lot of them go once every multiple months simply because they take that long to make. Now that I think about it, I think most YouTube videos of real work, they might take a few days to make, like 1 or 2 days of 8-hour shift. And even then you could say, oh, what about like 1.5 hour YouTube documentary on Epstein or something? Even then, it's not going to change your life. Even if it might take longer, just apply the other ones of the three I talked about, and at least one of them will eliminate it. Be ruthless with what you let into your mind, because your mind is extremely powerful, and what you feed it affects you in extremely powerful ways. You want to be very careful with that. Most people just put in whatever they're given, which definitely doesn't lead to free thinking, critical thinking, or anything good. You want to think of your mind a bit like a basement or a mental attic. You don't want to have useless toys, clutter, and trash everywhere, and random bits and pieces of food and the most random things. You want to have useful tools and materials you can actually use to build stuff with. I would rather have a basement full of tools and power tools and some wood and some steel and some some nails, so that I can actually build something, rather than an attic full of random toys from when you were 5 and what else? Old dishes and trash everywhere and bits of food and rats. You can't build very much with the second one. Equally though, you want to choose people deliberately. You are the average of your 5 friends or whatever. That's definitely true. They shape who you become not more than anything anymore. But the way it works is it depends on how much you're exposed to it. So if you expose yourself for hours on end every single day to high quality input, like for example books, then obviously over time you will become closer to the people writing the books, the people inside of the books, and all of that. If you expose yourself for hours a day to low quality people you don't want to, you have nothing to learn from, or technically you can learn from everybody, but people you wouldn't want to be like, then I'm afraid to say you need to cut them off, because the more time you spend with them, the closer you're going to get to them. You might think, oh no, but what if if it goes the other way, right? They're going to become more like me. Yes, but generally if it's you against 3, 4, 5 other people, you're not going to win. And even then, maybe, but one, you don't want to risk it. But generally what's going to happen is you're going to get to the average. They're going to become a bit more like you, great. You're going to become a bit more like them, not so great, until you're basically all equal. However, no matter what source it is, you want to avoid being dependent on a single source. No one person can teach everything. No one is always correct or always has the right answer. And relying on one guru or source of truth is a dangerous pitfall. Obviously, because the person or the single source of truth you have might be wrong, but more importantly, because if you only rely on one person to learn everything you ever learn, you will never be able to surpass them. You will never be able to surpass your teacher. And so with that, and then this is a slightly separate note, but you want to evaluate every lesson or principle for yourself. At first, maybe not so much, because your life isn't great, so generally people aren't malicious and lying to you. But over time, as you develop yourself, it's good to start questioning the things you believe. But the most important one of this is you never just want to have one creator and be completely reliant on them or exclusive with them. You basically want to be polyamorous, or whatever the word is. You always want to have multiple places you're learning from. You might have one core person you learn from. At first it might be your dad, then a mentor, then whatever. But you always want to have things on the side. You want to have your main one and then little side pieces. So maybe books, then you also have another creator on the side that you listen to that has some opposing views, which creates interesting confrontations in your mind. All of that. But you never want to only have one. It's like you would never only want to learn from a single book. It's always better to learn from multiple books, assuming they're all good books, which I already talked about in the quality of the things you consume part of this. And as for these 14 principles, which I'm sharing in this series of podcasts, you want to see it not as everything you will ever need to learn, but rather as the tools you can use to learn everything you can learn. You will never be able to know everything, but you use it. Imagine you have a massive excavation site. Excavation is where you dig and break off rocks to try and find fossils of dinosaurs and whatever. You have this massive excavation site. I won't give you the fossils, but what I will give you is the hammer and the little nail that you need to whack away at the rock, break it off, and be able to find your own fossils. You might choose to go on the bottom left side of the rock, maybe on the top of the rock, on the right side. That's up to you. All I'm giving you is the tools you need and the knowledge and the glasses and the maps you need to be able to find whatever fossils you want to look for. You always want to question or verify whatever received information you get, even if it's from an expert. Asking why is perhaps the most powerful question there is in any language, in the English language, but also Mandarin and Russian and whatever you want to speak. And generally, the why question is almost forbidden. I don't know if you've noticed, but say you were in physics class, you're allowed to say how. You're allowed to say, why does this happen? to a certain extent, but if you keep asking it, at some point people are almost threatened by how much you're asking it. It's almost a forbidden question of sorts. And it's not about disrespecting, but it's rather about dismantling unexamined structures of authority, which authority depends on. Because you want to think about it, it's like a Pascal's wager. If you ask why do we have to brush our teeth, for example, or why do we have to stand in line, or why do we have to be shy and act humble? Most of the time, or hopefully, if you live in a decently good system, most of the time you will get a satisfactory answer, and then you move on with your life. In that case, nothing changes, or at least you're even more certain of it, and you're less likely to do bad things because you know why you're meant to do certain things, But on the off chance, and it happens more often than you might expect, you uncover something that is just a completely irrational thing that most people do because most people do it, and there's no actual reason for it, like, what was the example I gave? Oh yeah, pretending to be shy or all of this stuff. Then you have a massive breakthrough that gives you an enormous advantage and allows you to live truer to yourself and your core. The unexamined life is not worth living. You want to question rules and requirements. Most are stupid, and few are justified. You want to question the external world and the internal world. You want to question your thoughts, goals, beliefs, and values. You want to question your inner voice that says to stop because it hurts. And you want to question the origin of your opinions. Are they serving you, or have they perhaps been implanted by someone you are currently serving? You basically want to have a healthy distrust of authority. Naturally, we have this. We are born with this. Children naturally rebel. Teenagers do it too. But systems train adults to stop questioning and blindly follow authority. However, you have to realize that authorities are frequently as clueless as anybody else. And again, if you question them and you're right, you gain a lot. And if you question them and you're wrong in questioning them, you lose nothing. You never want to do something just because everybody else does it. That's the worst reason to do something. And truly thinking for yourself requires checking the origin and effectiveness of your opinions. And generally, it's the ones you don't want to question that are the ones you should be questioning. But again, this part of questioning and distrusting authority is, I'm tempted to say, a more advanced thing, not because you can't, well, to some extent you can't. You need to be exposed to enough life experience and knowledge in order to be able to question. Because at the start, you can question all you want, but if you don't know what is a good answer, what is a bad answer, you can't really, it doesn't help you in any way. So at the start, just try different things out. Naturally, some things will work for your goals, other things won't. It's just a matter of constant self-improvement, but eventually you will get to the point where questioning authority actually becomes useful. At the start, a lot of social norms, for example, dressing in a certain way for a certain venue, it doesn't make sense for you to break it, right? Because nobody really cares, you don't matter. But once you build yourself up to be something, not following those norms will lead to benefits not only for your personal life and sanity, but also, for example, it will lead to more media coverage, which might help your business, and so on. You need to have the courage to be wrong and act on incomplete information. That's the next point. Most see the desired path but wait passively. Being wrong is not the opposite of being right, it's the prerequisite to being right. You need to be wrong first in order to be able to be right. Obviously, you can be right from the first try, but generally being wrong gets you closer to being right than not trying at all. Excessive caution is a serious risk itself. Being so cautious of questioning things, of trying different things out, of making decisions with incomplete information is more dangerous than the consequences of making the wrong decision. Very often, decisions are not life or death. A lot of opportunities, on top of that, are fleeting. You have one chance before they vanish. So acting fast is an advantage. You will never have enough information to act off of. You must act with incomplete information. You want to lead without seeking permission. Do things, there's the saying, do not ask for permission, but beg for forgiveness. Stop chasing validation, even from attractive people. And the fear of being wrong blocks the chance to be right when it counts. You want to be the opposite of a conformist. Most people just sleepwalk through life, following the crowd. But that usually leads off of a cliff, or it doesn't lead to the top of the mountain. What you must do is take the blindfold off, look for yourself, see which mountain peak you want to climb, and go that way. Even if it means at first you're alone until you find other fellow travelers on the way. And again, this is something I talked about in our previous conversation, but conscious ignorance to avoid change is a grave sin. Knowing what you need to do, having the knowledge and the information to do it, of what you should do, but not doing it, not learning, not changing your behavior, is the worst thing you could do. Just like in the previous conversation, I said how knowing what you should do but not doing it is torturous to yourself. At this point, knowing what you should do but not doing it is just, why would you do that? It doesn't advantage anybody except for the people who make money, get satisfaction from seeing you not achieve your fullest potential. I won't say who that is, but I'm sure you can figure it out for yourself. And just like a tree is either growing or it's dying, if you don't learn, you are dying. If you're not growing your brain cells and making them connect to new ones, it is slowly deteriorating. And penultimately, you must face your problems directly. You never run from or hope problems disappear. Problems are often much smaller than you might think, especially if you're not looking at them or trying to ignore them. And just like closing your eyes doesn't make you invisible, not looking at a problem or turning around and ignoring it does not make it vanish. You want to objectively evaluate your life. That's extremely important. You always want to be honest with yourself. That's another conversation. But you want to objectively evaluate your life, diagnose the issues, diagnose where you're doing well, and more importantly, where you're not doing so well, where you want to be doing better, and fix those things, which you only do through learning, gathering information, filling up your fuel tank, and pressing on the gas, learning, changing your behavior. And obviously you can learn from other people's experience, but you also want to make sure to learn from your own experience. You want to basically develop this sort of meta-awareness where things happen to you in your day-to-day life. Most people just sleepwalk through it with the blindfold, don't notice. You would be surprised how much you can learn from your day-to-day life. Then again, you must be able to separate the events and enjoying the events from the lesson which you should incorporate. But also keep in mind that fundamentally, by only exposing yourself to your own ideas, you cannot grow as much as somebody who exposes himself to other people's ideas. I pointed at the books, the bookshelf behind me. What I mean by that is, I have this, I was in Strasbourg once, and I was walking around just in silence, no podcast, no audiobook, no nothing, just walking around, and I was thinking, and I thought, oh yes, I had these ideas. When I got back home and wrote them, I realized that a new idea that developed as I was writing the old ideas and lessons of sorts was that without exposing yourself to new stimulus, all you basically do is find confirmation for your already existing beliefs. That doesn't mean you can't learn. You can learn from your own life, but most of the time you want to try and learn from other people's experiences, expose yourself to other people's ideas to avoid confirmation bias. Because if you have your set beliefs and your set quote-unquote lessons, you just go about your normal, boring day-to-day life where big problems don't arise, big crises don't arise. You're not going to learn anything new, which you learn from big problems, big life changes, big crises. You're just going to look at these little nuggets throughout your boring life, because most of our lives, well, for most people, is quite boring. And you're just going to use that to reinforce the beliefs you already have, which is very rarely helpful, at least in terms of developing yourself. And finally, you must pace your improvement. Just like you don't set out a marathon sprinting, but you also don't start by walking it. Turning your life around, changing your life, is never instant. Massive changes are never instant. Growth takes time, and there are no shortcuts, and the shortcuts there are often turn out to be a swamp, and there's unintended consequences to them. Your aim should be to improve as fast as possible, but no faster than that, which you can't do anyway. But you want to push hard for big change in short time frames while still maintaining the patience and resilience that you need to keep going over the long run. A lot of people create this dichotomy between either you lock in for 6 weeks to completely change your life in 6 weeks, which never happens, and then they burn out. They might go to the gym. It's the people who sign up on January 1st, and by January, I think it's 21st, 70% of people have given up on their New Year's resolutions. That's the first contingent. But then you have the opposition to that, which says, oh, you actually need to be patient. Most results come after multiple years because of compounding exponentials and all this stuff. They're not wrong, but where they do mess up is they take this as an excuse to not improve as fast as possible. They say, oh, I'm taking my time, I don't want to burn out. What you want to do, and what I've been doing, and it's worked fantastically for myself as well as everybody else I know who is on self-improvement, is you want to push for as much improvement in as short of a period of time as possible. You want to basically constantly do these sprints or constantly be learning as much as you can, spending every second improving yourself, while still not knowing that you will not see massive results within those few weeks, but you stack up enough of those intense weeks and months of self-improvement. After a few years, you will become completely unrecognizable. That's what I've been able to do basically every year for the past few years, and it's quite beautiful. So you want to push for big change in short time frames while still having the patience and resilience, knowing that results will lag, but continuing to work anyway. You want the maximum improvement rate while still being realistic about the time it takes and understanding that. You want to have the intensity of the guy who locks in, quote unquote, for 6 weeks, but with the patience of a 75-year-old man who's been working out for 65 years.